Once there was a woman named Layla. Her life was, a simple song, a melody played on a familiar flute. She lived in a small house with a garden full of jasmine flowers. Their scent filled the air, a sweet promise of ordinary happiness. Her husband Kenan was the sturdy rhythm to her melody. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a mountain, strong and constant. They had a daughter, a little girl named Elif, whose laughter was like the tinkling of tiny bells. Layla believed this song would play forever. It was a humble tune, but it was hers, and she cherished every note of it. But life, like an unpredictable sea, can change its temper in a single breath. One Tuesday morning, the sun rose just as it always did. Kenan drank his tea, kissed her forehead, and walked out the door. He said he was going to the market. He said he would be back by noon. But noon came and went, a silent visitor that overstayed its welcome. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, yet the front gate remained closed. The silence in the house grew louder, heavier, until it was a physical weight pressing down on Layla's chest, suffocating the simple song she once knew. Panic arrived first, a frantic bird beating its wings against the cage of her ribs. She called his friends, she called his workplace. No one had seen him. The police listened with tired eyes, their notebooks filled with stories of men who leave. They spoke of possibilities, of choices, of debts she knew nothing about. Each suggestion was a small stone thrown at the window of her hope, creating tiny cracks in her reality. The world she had built with careful hands, the world that felt as solid as the earth beneath her feet, was beginning to dissolve into a disorienting mist. Her husband had not just left the house. He had walked out of their life, leaving behind only a question mark. The days that followed bled into one another, a monotonous grey river of waiting. Every creak of the floorboards, every knock on a neighbour's door sent a jolt of desperate hope through her. She would rush to the window, her heart a wild drum, only to see a stranger passing by. The jasmine in the garden seemed to lose its fragrance, its sweet scent replaced by the metallic tang of fear. The mountain of his presence had crumbled, leaving behind a vast, empty space. Layla stood at the edge of this void, the melody of her life silenced, holding the hand of her small daughter, who was too young to understand that their world had been broken. In the beginning, there was a flurry of concern. Neighbours brought warm dishes of food. Friends sat with her, their voices a soft murmur of sympathy, filling the heavy silence Kenan had left behind. They spoke in hushed tones, their words like gentle hands on her shoulder. They promised to be there for her, to be her rock, her support. For a short while, Layla felt a fragile web of community holding her up, preventing her from falling completely into the abyss of her sorrow. It was a comfort, this shared grieving, a sign that she was not entirely alone in her bewilderment and pain. But sympathy, like a flower, has a season. Soon the visits became less frequent. The phone calls dwindled. The gazes of the neighbours, once filled with pity, now held a different quality. There was suspicion in their eyes, a silent questioning. Whispers followed her like a shadow when she walked to the market. Did she know more than she was saying? Was there a secret she was hiding? The story of the disappearing husband became a piece of local gossip, a tale told over tea, and she, Layla, was its unfortunate protagonist. The web of community began to fray, its threads snapping one by one, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Even family, the supposed bedrock of one's life, started to drift away. Her in-laws, once warm and welcoming, now looked at her as if she were a reminder of their own loss and shame. They saw their son's absence reflected in her tired face. Her own relatives offered advice that felt like judgment. "You must move on," they would say, their words meant to be helpful, but landing like stones. They did not understand that she was frozen in time, trapped on that Tuesday morning. The world was moving forward, but she was stuck in the echo of a closed door, her pleas for help fading into the noise of their own busy lives. Loneliness became her most constant companion. It was not just the absence of a partner, but the absence of a world she once belonged to. She was a woman adrift, her social ties severed not by a clean cut, but by a slow, painful erosion. The house that was once a home now felt like a cage, its walls echoing with the ghosts of conversations and the silence of unanswered questions. She learned that a crowd could be the loneliest place, that the pity of others could be heavier than their anger. She was left to navigate the vast, empty landscape of her new life, with only her daughter's small hand to hold on to. In the center of her crumbling world, there was Elif. Her daughter was a small, bright flame in the encroaching darkness. She was a reason to get out of bed when despair whispered for her to stay hidden under the covers. Elif's needs were simple and immediate. She needed breakfast, she needed her hair to be braided, she needed stories to be read before sleep. These small daily rituals became Layla's anchor, grounding her in the present moment and preventing her from being swept away by the tidal wave of her grief. For Elif, she had to be more than a grieving wife. She had to be a mother, a fortress of strength and love. The financial struggle was a relentless daily battle. The money Kenan had left behind was a small pond, and it was drying up quickly under the harsh sun of their expenses. Layla, who had never worked outside the home, now had to find a way to provide. She took on any work she could find. She cleaned the houses of wealthier neighbors, her hands growing rough from soap and water. She mended clothes for the local tailor, her fingers aching late into the night. Every coin she earned was a small victory, a shield against the looming threat of hunger and eviction. It was humbling work, but her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her days were a tightrope walk between earning a living and raising a child. She would wake before the sun to prepare for the day, her mind a constant flurry of calculations. How much for bread? How much for the electricity bill? Can Elif's shoes last another month? She would return home in the evening, her body weary, only to face the emotional needs of her daughter. She had to smile when she wanted to weep. She had to answer Elif's innocent questions about her father with gentle, evasive truths that protected the child's heart without completely lying. He is on a long journey, she would say, a journey she herself did not understand. Despite the hardship, Layla was determined to create a world of warmth and security for Elif. She would save a few pennies to buy a small sweet for her. She would invent magical stories about brave princesses and talking animals to fill their small home with wonder. She shielded Elif from the whispers of the neighbors and the weight of their poverty as best she could. Her love for her daughter was a fierce, protective fire. It was this love that fueled her, that turned her exhaustion into resolve. She was fighting not just for their survival, but for her daughter's right to a childhood, a small island of joy in a sea of uncertainty. Even in the darkest of nights, a star can find a way to shine. For Layla, hope was not a grand bonfire, but a series of small, flickering candles she lit for herself. It was the unexpected kindness of the baker who slipped an extra loaf of bread into her bag. It was the moment Elif learned to write her name, a small miracle of progress and life moving forward. These moments were rare, but they were precious. They were whispers that told her she was not entirely forgotten by the universe, that goodness still existed in the small corners of the world, waiting to be found. Her own determination became a source of strength. There were days when despair was a physical illness, leaving her weak and breathless. On those days, she would look at her reflection in the mirror and see a stranger with tired eyes and lines of worry etched onto her face. But then, she would see something else flicker within those eyes, a stubborn spark. It was the part of her that refused to be broken. It was the voice that said, "I have come this far. I can take one more step." This inner resilience was a muscle she exercised daily, growing stronger with every challenge she overcame. She found solace in the simple, quiet things. In the evenings, after Elif was asleep, she would sit in her small garden. The jasmine flowers, which had once reminded her of her loss, now offered a different kind of comfort. Their persistent fragrance was a testament to life's ability to endure. She would tend to the plants, her hands in the cool earth, feeling a connection to something solid and real. The act of nurturing these plants, of helping something grow, was a quiet act of defiance against the emptiness that threatened to consume her. The garden became her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe and gather her strength. Hope also came in the form of a dream, a vision for the future. It was not a dream of Keenan's return, for that hope had become too painful to hold. Instead, it was a dream for Elif. She imagined her daughter growing up, educated and strong, free from the shadows that had haunted their lives. She envisioned a future where Elif would not be defined by her father's absence, but by her own potential. This vision was her North Star. It guided her through the exhaustion and the loneliness. It gave her purpose. She was not just surviving. She was building a foundation for a better life for her child, brick by painful brick. Years passed. The sharp edges of grief began to soften, worn down by the relentless rhythm of daily life. Elif was no longer a small child, but a young girl on the cusp of her teenage years, her laughter now a confident, bright sound that filled the house. Layla had found a fragile peace, a quiet acceptance of her reality. The question mark of Keenan's disappearance remained, but it no longer dominated every waking thought. It had become a part of her story, a scar that she had learned to live with. Her life was small, but it was stable. She had built it herself with her own two hands. Then, one evening, there was a knock on the door. It was not the familiar rap of a neighbour or the postman. It was a hesitant, uncertain sound, like a memory trying to find its way back. Layla opened the door, her mind on the dinner she was cooking, and there he was, Keenan. He looked older, thinner, his face a map of hardships she could not read. He was a ghost from a past she had buried, standing on her doorstep, real and solid and utterly impossible. The world, which had finally settled into a predictable orbit, suddenly stopped spinning. Her first reaction was not joy or anger, but a profound, disorienting shock. It was as if a character from a long-forgotten book had walked off the page and into her kitchen. Her mind struggled to connect this stranger with the husband she had loved, the man who had been the center of her universe. All the emotion she had carefully packed away, the rage, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the sliver of foolish hope, came rushing back, a chaotic flood that threatened to drown her. She could not speak. She could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage once more. Elif, who had come to see who was at the door, stood behind her mother, her eyes wide with confusion. She saw a man she did not know, a stranger who was causing her mother to tremble. This was not the father from her mother's stories, the man on a long journey. This was a tired, broken-looking man who seemed as lost as they were. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken years and unanswered questions. Kenan's return was not a joyful reunion. It was the arrival of a storm, and Layla knew in that gut-wrenching moment that it would change everything all over again. The story, when it finally came, did not pour out in a single, cleansing rush. It emerged in fragments, in broken sentences, whispered across the kitchen table in the dead of night. Kenan spoke of debt, not the small kind that one can manage, but a deep, dangerous debt to ruthless men. He had made a foolish mistake, a gamble he thought would secure their future, but it had backfired spectacularly. The men he owed money to had threatened not just him, but his family. They had threatened to harm Layla and Elif. His disappearance, he explained, was not an act of abandonment, but a desperate, clumsy attempt to protect them. He told her of his years in hiding, a life lived in the shadows. He had moved from city to city, taking on menial jobs under false names, always looking over his shoulder. He lived in constant fear, a ghost haunted by the life he had left behind. He had sent money when he could, small amounts to an old post office box he hoped she might check, but he never knew if she received it. He spoke of his shame, a burden so heavy it had stooped his shoulders and aged him beyond his years. He had run away to save them, but in doing so he had lost himself completely. Layla listened, her heart a tumultuous sea of conflicting emotions. A part of her felt a flicker of the old love, a pang of pity for this broken man who had suffered so much. She saw the husband she once knew in his tired eyes, but another, stronger part of her felt a cold, hard anger. He had made a choice without her. He had decided to carry the burden alone, and in doing so, he had condemned her to years of struggle, loneliness, and public shame. His protection had felt like a punishment. He had saved them from a threat she never knew, but he had left her to fight 1,000 real and visible battles every single day. Elif's reaction was even more complex. She had grown up with the myth of a father on a long journey. The reality of this man, a stranger who had left them to face hardship because of his own mistakes, was a difficult truth to swallow. She was quiet and withdrawn, watching him with wary eyes. There was no instant connection, no joyful father-daughter reunion. There was only the awkwardness of strangers sharing a space, a home that he no longer fit into. The years of absence had created a chasm between them, a vast, empty space that words alone could not bridge. Forgiveness did not arrive like a sudden burst of sunlight. It was more like the slow, patient work of tending a neglected garden. Layla had to first pull out the weeds of bitterness and resentment that had taken deep root in her heart. For years, her anger had been a shield, protecting her from the pain of her abandonment. To let go of it felt like making herself vulnerable all over again. There were days when she looked at Keenan and saw only the years of struggle, the lonely nights, the whispers of the neighbours. The pain was a physical presence in the house, a guest that refused to leave. Keenan, for his part, did not ask for immediate forgiveness. He seemed to understand that it was not his to demand, but something he might, with time and effort, earn. He started with small things. He fixed the leaking tap that Layla had never had the money or energy to repair. He worked in the garden, his hands digging into the same earth that had once been her only sanctuary. He did not try to reclaim his position as the head of the house. Instead, he took on the role of a quiet helper, trying to mend the physical world around them as a first step toward mending their broken emotional world. The true turning point came not from a grand gesture, but from a quiet conversation. One evening, Layla finally told him everything. She spoke of the hunger, the fear, the loneliness. She told him how Elif would cry for him at night and how she had to invent stories to soothe her. She laid bare the full weight of the life she had been forced to lead. For the first time, Keenan did not make excuses. He simply listened, and the tears that streamed down his face were tears of genuine remorse. In that moment of shared vulnerability, a tiny seed of understanding was planted between them. Elif began to thaw slowly, cautiously. She watched her father's patient efforts. She saw the way he looked at her mother, with a mixture of love and deep regret. He started telling her stories, not grand tales of adventure, but small, true stories from his own childhood. He was trying to give her a past, a connection to the man he was before he became a ghost. It was a slow process, building a bridge one fragile plank at a time. Forgiveness, Layla realized, was not about forgetting the past, but about choosing to build a new future alongside it in the same garden. With Keenan's return came a gradual yet profound shift in the fabric of their lives. He found steady work at a construction site, his labor honest and hard. His income, added to what Layla earned from her now well-established sewing work, lifted the heavy cloak of financial worry that had suffocated them for so long. For the first time in years, Layla could buy more than just the bare necessities. She could buy Elif a new dress, not because the old one was torn, but simply because it was beautiful. This small freedom was a luxury that felt like a miracle, a splash of vibrant color on a once grey canvas. The house began to feel like a home again. The silence that had once been filled with loneliness was now filled with the sounds of a family relearning how to be together. There was the sound of Keenan's hammer as he fixed a loose floorboard, the murmur of conversation over dinner, and most importantly, the return of easy laughter. They were not erasing the past, but weaving a new pattern around the hole it had left. They were creating new memories, small moments of shared joy that began to outshine the long years of sorrow. The jasmine in the garden seemed to smell sweeter, its fragrance once again a promise of happiness. Layla found that she had changed. The years of struggle had forged a strength in her she never knew she possessed. She was no longer the woman who depended on her husband's presence as her mountain. She was her own mountain, solid and self-sufficient. She continued her sewing work, not just for the money, but because it was hers. It was a symbol of her resilience and independence. Keenan respected this new strength in her. He did not try to diminish it, but admired it. Their relationship was being rebuilt on a new foundation, one of partnership and mutual respect, not old dependencies. The community, which had once turned its back on her, began to see them differently. The story was no longer a piece of scandalous gossip, but a tale of hardship and reunion. The whispers of suspicion were replaced by nods of respect for Layla's endurance and for Kenan's effort to atone for his past. They were no longer the broken family, the woman abandoned by her husband. They were a family that had weathered an unimaginable storm and was now, against all odds, finding its way back to the light. Their rewoven life was a testament not to a perfect story, but to the beauty of an imperfect one that chooses to continue. The journey from despair to joy is never a straight line. It is a winding path, with valleys of sorrow and hills of unexpected grace. Layla's life was a testament to this truth. She had walked through the deepest valley, where the shadows were long and the silence was deafening. She had faced the world alone, armed with nothing but a mother's fierce love and a stubborn will to survive. She learned that the human heart, even when shattered into 1,000 pieces, possesses an incredible capacity to heal, to find reasons to keep beating. Her new happiness was different from the simple, untroubled joy of her past. It was a deeper, more resilient kind of happiness. It was a joy that had been earned through tears and struggle. It was a joy that understood the value of a peaceful morning, a shared meal, a quiet evening. She had learned that hope is not the absence of suffering, but the choice to believe in the possibility of sunlight even while the storm is raging. Her resilience had not just helped her survive, it had transformed her, carving her into a woman of profound strength and quiet wisdom. The return of her husband was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter. It taught her that love is not a fairy tale. It is a choice. It is the choice to forgive, to understand, and to rebuild. Their new life was not a return to what they had before, but the creation of something new, something stronger, built upon the foundations of honesty and shared experience. They were two people who had been broken by life in different ways and were now healing together, their scars a reminder of the battles they had overcome. In the end, Layla's story is a song of endurance. It is a reminder that even when the melody of our life is interrupted, we can find the courage to compose a new one. It speaks of the light that can be found in a daughter's smile, the strength that can be drawn from the earth of a small garden, and the grace that can be discovered in forgiveness. Layla's journey shows us that new beginnings are always possible. The sun will always rise after the longest night, and for those who hold on to hope, its light is all the warmer for the darkness that came before.